You can map the exact topography of a woman's dress by what she leaves on her plate. For the first 6 months of her employment, Clara knew her boss solely through porcelain landscapes. A half-eaten sea base meant the board of directors was being difficult. Ignored roasted vegetables meant an impending product launch. And a completely clean plate, a rare, coveted phenomenon, meant Victoria Vance, the formidable CEO of Vance Enterprises, had actually allowed herself a moment of peace. Clara was a chef, fundamentally wired to nurture. She had traded the chaotic, ego-driven battlegrounds of Michelin-starred kitchens for the pristine, terrifyingly quiet isolation of Victoria's penthouse. It was supposed to be a simple gig. Cook for a billionaire, collect a massive paycheck, and eventually open her own bistro. She hadn't planned on falling in love with a ghost. Victoria was a myth in her own home. She was a blur of impeccably tailored silk suits, the sharp, authoritative click of stiletto heels on marble, and a voice that commanded multi-billion-dollar acquisitions over the phone. Clara rarely saw her face-to-face. Until the night of the rainstorm. It was past 2 a.m. Clara was in the cavernous, stainless steel kitchen, testing a reduction sauce for a gala dinner Victoria was hosting later that week. The storm outside was thrashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, drowning out the city lights of Lagos below. "It smells like brown butter and thyme," a voice said, soft and entirely lacking its usual boardroom steel. Clara jumped, almost dropping her whisk. She turned to find Victoria standing in the archway. The billionaire was stripped of her armor. She wore oversized cashmere lounge pants and a simple tank top. Her dark hair, usually pinned into a severe twist, was falling loosely around her shoulders. She was barefoot. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance," Clara said, her heart doing a sudden, violent rhythm in her chest. "I didn't mean to wake you. I can wrap this up." "Victoria," she corrected, walking slowly toward the kitchen island. "And you didn't wake me. My brain won't shut off. The Vanguard merger is complicated." She looked down at the copper saucepan. "What is that?" "Just testing a sauce," Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron. "But frankly, you look like you need something solid. Have you eaten since the salad at noon?" Victoria let out a self-deprecating laugh, running a hand through her hair. "I honestly don't remember." Clara didn't ask, she just moved. She bypassed the truffles and Wagyu beef in the walk-in fridge. Instead, she grabbed a loaf of artisanal sourdough she'd baked that morning, aged cheddar and Gruyere. She sliced a perfectly ripe tomato and began assembling a grilled cheese sandwich, moving with the rhythmic, practiced grace of a professional. Victoria sat on a stool, watching her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet of the penthouse. It was a comfortable, simmering stillness. When Clara slid the plate across the granite counter, accompanied by a small bowl of creamy tomato bisque, Victoria closed her eyes at the steam. She took a bite, and Clara watched the exact moment the tension drained from the billionaire's shoulders. "This," Victoria said quietly, her dark eyes locking onto Clara's, "is the best thing I've had in a year." "Sometimes," Clara smiled, leaning against the counter, "you don't need a deconstructed foam. You just need bread and cheese." Victoria smiled back, a genuine, unguarded expression that made Clara's breath hitch. "You're very observant, Clara. It's my job to feed you." "I think," Victoria murmured, taking another bite, "you do a lot more than just feed me." That night changed the topography of the penthouse. The kitchen, once Clara's solitary domain, became a shared sanctuary. The midnight meetings became a ritual. 2 or 3 times a week, Victoria would wander in after the rest of the world had gone to sleep. They talked while Clara prepped for the next day. Victoria talked about the crushing, breathless pressure of thousands of jobs relying on her decisions. Clara talked about her grandmother's kitchen, the way flour fell on her hands, and her dream of a small restaurant with wooden tables and a mismatched herb garden. Clara found herself memorizing the details of the woman, rather than her diet. She noticed the small, pale scar above Victoria's left eyebrow. She noticed that Victoria's eyes were not just brown, but speckled with gold when the pendant lights hit them. She noticed the way Victoria leaned slightly toward her when she spoke, as if Clara were a gravitational pull. And Clara was falling. Hard. It was terrifying. The power dynamic was a chasm between them. Victoria was the employer. Clara was the staff. Yet, in the quiet hours of the morning, surrounded by the scent of baking bread and roasting garlic, those boundaries dissolved into smoke. The tension between them grew thicker than a demi-glace. It was in the brush of their hands when Clara passed her a mug of tea. It wasn't the way Victoria's gaze would drop to Clara's lips when she tasted a spoon Clara offered her. Every interaction was a charged wire, humming with unspoken things. The day the Vanguard merger finally closed, the news cycle exploded. Victoria Vance was on every channel, hailed as a titan of industry. Clara spent the afternoon preparing a celebratory dinner: lobster, caviar, champagne. But when Victoria finally returned to the penthouse at 10 p.m., she looked entirely hollowed out. She walked past the dining room, ignoring the extravagant spread, and went straight to the kitchen. Clara was cleaning her knives. She looked up and stopped immediately. Victoria looked exhausted to her bones. "They're calling you the queen of the tech world tonight," Clara said gently. "I feel like I'm underwater," Victoria whispered, gripping the edge of the marble island so tightly her knuckles were white. "I stood in a room with 500 people popping champagne for me, and I have never felt more utterly, entirely alone." She looked up, and the raw vulnerability in her eyes fractured something deep inside Clara. Without thinking about boundaries or paychecks or the sheer insanity of it, Clara walked around the island. "You're not alone," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria looked at her, the mask completely stripped away. "The only real thing in my life right now," Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly, "is this kitchen. Is you." Victoria reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the collar of Clara's chef coat. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of heat straight to Clara's core. Clara reached up, gently wrapping her hand around Victoria's wrist, intending to steady her, but instead, she found herself stepping closer. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly thin. Victoria's eyes darted from Clara's eyes to her lips, and the distance between them evaporated. Victoria kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It was a breaking of the dam. Victoria's hands came up to cup Clara's face, pulling her in with a desperate, crushing need. Clara let out a soft sound, dropping her towel and wrapping her arms around Victoria's waist, anchoring the billionaire against her. The kiss was a collision of worlds. It tasted of expensive champagne and the salt of Victoria's unshed tears. Clara kissed her back with all the quiet, simmering longing she had been holding on to for months. She poured her warmth, her grounding reality, into the woman who spent her life carrying the sky. Victoria's fingers tangled in Clara's hair, pulling her tighter, as if terrified Clara might vanish. Clara backed Victoria slowly against the cool marble of the counter, deepening the kiss, exploring the soft, desperate yielding of a woman who never yielded to anyone. Time stopped. There were no boardrooms, no investments, no staff, no titles. There was only the heat of their bodies, the ragged sound of their breathing, and the profound, terrifying realization that there was no going back from this. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. Victoria's eyes were closed, a soft, wondrous smile playing on her lips. "I have wanted to do that," Victoria breathed, "since the night you made me a grilled cheese." Clara let out a shaky, quiet laugh, her thumb tracing the line of Victoria's jaw. "You're a billionaire, Victoria. You could have just asked for it." "Some things," Victoria said, finally opening her eyes to look deeply into Clara's, "are too important to demand. You have to wait until they're given." The next morning, the sun broke over the city, flooding the penthouse with brilliant, golden light. Clara stood in the kitchen, cracking eggs into a ceramic bowl. She heard the familiar click of heels approaching. She didn't turn around right away, a sudden, nervous flutter rising in her stomach. Had the reality of the morning ruined the magic of the night? Victoria walked into the kitchen, fully dressed in a sharp, intimidating navy suit, ready to conquer the world again. But as she stopped beside Clara, the intimidating aura melted. She reached out, her hand gently tracing the curve of Clara's waist, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the side of her neck. "Good morning," Victoria murmured against her skin. Clara turned, a brilliant smile breaking across her face. The topography had shifted permanently. "Good morning," Clara said, sliding a plate across the counter. It wasn't a complex, multi-tiered breakfast. It was simple, perfect, and deeply understood. Victoria looked at the food, then back up at Clara, her eyes shining with something that looked a lot like home. Perfect.